Picture this. A French warship is sailing toward New York Harbor. Not to attack, not for a military exercise. It is carrying one specific cargo, an official order from President Charles de Gaulle to collect French gold from American vaults and bring it home. Because de Gaulle no longer trusts the dollar. The year is 1965, and France is not alone. Country after country is quietly doing the same thing, converting their dollar reserves into physical gold and pulling it out of Fort Knox. Because they have figured out the trick. The United States has been printing more dollars than it has gold to back them. The most powerful currency on earth is quietly, systematically running a fraud. By 1971, Fort Knox is nearly empty. On the evening of August 15th, Richard Nixon walks in front of a camera and with a calm voice announces that the United States is suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. He calls it temporary. He blames speculators. What he does not say is that the vault is gone. The next morning, a German currency trader named Hans Becker walks into his Frankfurt office and cannot execute a single transaction. The markets are frozen. The entire architecture of global finance, every exchange rate, every trade agreement, every central bank reserve on earth is suddenly built on nothing. If the dollar is not backed by gold, what is it backed by? For 2 years, nobody in Washington has a real answer. Then Henry Kissinger walks into a room in Riyadh. And what happens next, nobody will talk about for the next 40 years. Most people remember 1973 as the year the Arab world turned off the oil tap. Long lines at gas stations, rationing, Americans sitting in their cars for hours just to fill a tank. The price of oil quadrupled in a matter of weeks. Industrial output across the West collapsed. Airlines grounded flights. European governments told their citizens to stop driving on Sundays. It was the first time in modern history that ordinary people physically felt what it meant to depend on something they did not control. In Washington, the mood was panic. In Riyadh, the mood was power. But one man in Washington was not panicking. Henry Kissinger, the most cold-blooded strategic mind in American foreign policy, looked at the crisis and saw something nobody else was seeing. He did not see an oil shortage. He saw a negotiating chip of historic proportions. Here's what Kissinger understood that everyone else missed. The Arab oil embargo had just demonstrated one thing with absolute clarity. Whoever controlled the price and flow of oil controlled the entire industrial world. Every factory, every military, every government budget on earth ran on it. Oil was not just energy. Oil was power itself, and the dollar, stripped of gold, desperately needed something new to give it value. Kissinger's idea was almost absurdly simple. What if the dollar did not need gold anymore? What if it just needed oil instead? In June 1974, he boards a plane to Saudi Arabia. He carries no press, no public agenda. The meeting does not appear in any official schedule. And what he offers the Saudi royal family that week is a deal so lopsided, so audacious, that when the details finally leaked 40 years later, economists could barely believe it had actually happened. The agreement has no official name. It was never voted on by any parliament. No citizen of any country was ever asked to approve it. It was negotiated in private between two governments and buried in classified documents for decades. But its effects touch every single person on earth every single day. Here is what Kissinger put on the table. The United States would guarantee the military security of the Saudi royal family, American weapons, American training, American protection against any internal uprising or external threat. The House of Saud, one of the most vulnerable regimes in the most volatile region on earth, would become untouchable. In exchange, Saudi Arabia agreed to two things. First, all Saudi oil would be sold exclusively in dollars, not pounds, not francs, not any other currency on earth, only dollars. Second, the billions of dollars that flooded into Riyadh from oil sales would be recycled directly back into the United States, deposited into American banks, invested into American Treasury bonds, funding the American government's debt at the exact moment that debt was exploding. Think about what this actually means. Every country on earth that needed oil, which was every country on earth, had to first acquire dollars to buy it. which meant every government, every central bank, every economy on the planet was now structurally forced to hold American dollars in reserve. The demand for dollars became permanent, automatic, built into the physical necessity of keeping the lights on and the factories running. The dollar no longer needed gold behind it. It had something far more powerful. It had the one thing no modern civilization could survive without. A 40-year-old mechanic in Tokyo filling his car, a factory owner in Brazil paying his suppliers, a government in Nigeria funding its budget. None of them knew it, but every single one of them was now quietly, invisibly paying a tax to Washington every time they bought a barrel of oil. Kissinger had not just saved the dollar. He had made it the permanent landlord of the entire global economy. The system worked perfectly for Washington. For everyone else, it was a slow, invisible catastrophe that most people never connected to a single deal made in a Saudi palace in 1974. Here is how it worked in practice. Countries in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia needed oil to run their economies. To buy oil, they needed dollars. To get dollars, they had to borrow them, mostly from American banks, at interest rates set in Washington. By the late 1970s, American interest rates were climbing toward 20%. For a small country with dollar-denominated debt, that was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. In 1982, Mexico announced it could no longer service its foreign debt. Within months, Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, and Nigeria followed. An entire decade of development in Latin America was wiped out. Governments collapsed. Unemployment exploded. Millions of people who had never heard of Henry Kissinger or the Petrodollar system watched their savings disappear and their countries sink into poverty. Economists called it the lost decade, but it was not lost by accident. The International Monetary Fund arrived in each of these countries with rescue loans. The conditions attached to those loans required cutting public spending, privatizing state assets, and opening markets to foreign capital. In other words, the same countries that had been crushed by the dollar system were now being restructured to serve it even more efficiently. Meanwhile, in Riyadh, the money kept flowing. Saudi petrodollars poured into Wall Street, into American Treasury bonds, into the military contractors who sold weapons back to the Gulf. The circle was perfect and completely closed. One man in Lagos, one woman in Buenos Aires, one factory worker in Jakarta. None of them voted for this system. None of them knew it existed. All of them were paying for it every single day of their lives. For 50 years, the system held. Not because it was fair, because nobody powerful enough had the will or the means to break it. Then the cracks started appearing. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraq would sell its oil in euros instead of dollars. 3 years later, American tanks were in Baghdad. In 2009, Muammar Gaddafi proposed a pan-African gold currency to replace the dollar in oil trade across the continent. 2 years later, NATO jets were over Libya, and Gaddafi was dead in a ditch. Coincidence is possible. Pattern is harder to dismiss. But here is what is different today. The countries challenging the petrodollar system in 2024 and 2025 are not small. They're not vulnerable. China is the largest importer of oil on Earth, and it has been buying Saudi oil in yuan since 2023. Russia settled energy deals in rupees and yuan throughout the Ukraine war, while the dollar payment system was being used as a weapon against it. Brazil, India, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia itself are all actively building payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. The Kissinger deal required one thing above everything else to survive: Saudi Arabia's loyalty, and for the first time since 1974, that loyalty is visibly, publicly, quietly being renegotiated.
To order our free DVD, call 1-800-816-2432 or email us at mark13records@mail.com.